Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm Jason Aiken. In this week's episode, I will be discussing Tower of Heaven by Walter C. Brown. It appeared in the June 1949 issue of Short Stories. I discovered this while browsing the selection of free pulp stories uploaded to pulpgen.com. As you can see, a nice piece by artist Fred Humiston graces the first page. I was not familiar with the author, Walter C. Brown, when I first read this. But I did some searching, and thanks to the Fiction Mag's index, I found he has quite a bit of pulp work to his name. His work mostly appeared in Argosy, Blue Book, and short stories. But it looks like he made it into a few slick magazines as well. The Internet Speculative Fiction Database has an entry for Walter C. Brown as well, that contains one story that does not appear on the Fiction Mag's index page. It is a 1941 issue of Weird Tales with a story titled Death Wore an Astrakhan Hat. It appears he wrote many stories involving Asian characters, so I think it's safe to say it is the same guy who wrote the Weird Tales story. Tower of Heaven centers on Chun Tae, a model houseboy serving a wealthy couple, the Kemptons. Chun is the model servant on the surface, but he is really a murderer who robbed and killed a member of the ruthless Dragon Society. He finds the penthouse suite of the Kemptons the perfect hiding spot, and refers to it as the Tower of Heaven. The story deals with Chin's plans to leave the United States and return to China with the stolen American money, which could buy him a lot in his homeland. He has been waiting patiently, but with World War II having ended, he felt this was his chance. It also follows his underlying fear of discovery by the Dragon Society. I won't give anything away, as I will be reading this story in its entirety to close out this week's episode. I am assuming it is in the public domain. In the event you don't want to hear it in audio format, I will link to the free text version on pulpgen.com in the show notes. I will also link to a Kindle book that contains this story, as well as 3 others by Walter C. Brown. Just a word of caution. This was written in 1949, so there are some of those prejudices present, and some may call it a little racist at times. I didn't find anything outright hateful in the depiction of the Asians, though, and thought it was a pretty good story overall. I actually found Chin sorta likable, despite his criminality. But you can experience it for yourself if you wish. Next. All his life, Chun had heard whispered tales of the power of the Dragon Society, ruthless keepers of the ancient law. Tower of Heaven by Walter C. Brown. From Short Stories, June 1949. It was built of stone, steel, and glittering glass, rising high into the sky, and crowned with twin penthouses. Its name was the Park Lay Arms, but slant-eyed Chun Tae called it the Tower of Heaven. Chun Tae was houseboy for Major Kempton and his wife, who occupied the Park Lays Penthouse A. The Kemptons were very fond of their neat little Oriental servant, so polite and smiling, so soft-voiced and silent-footed. "Smartest houseboy in the whole USA," was Major Kempton's boast. "Worth a dozen white servants any day in the week." "Chun is so clever about everything," Mrs. Kempton would add, "and absolutely devoted to us. Why, one time the Everetts tried to bribe Chun away from us, offered to double his wages, but Chun told them he was too happy here with us. Now, there's genuine loyalty." And Chun Tay, in return, despised the Kemptons as a pair of gullible fools, and tagged them with derisive names. Jelly Belly was Chun's secret name for the paunchy, balding Major. Old Horse Eye for the Major's wife, who was rather long of face and bulging of eye. But Chun's mocking contempt for his rice-face employers did not prevent him from serving them with matchless efficiency and tireless patience. Because Chun Tay, the peerless houseboy, was a fugitive from the law, a cold-blooded murderer for money, and the Tower of Heaven offered a perfect hideout for himself and his loot. Not that Chun Tay had any fear of the rice-faced police. The Blue-Coat men had long since abandoned their search for the murderer of old Kang Lu. Aye, but there was the dreaded Dragon Society, of which Kang Lu had been an honored member. The dragons were long of memory and long of arm. They would not forget Kang Lu's murder, nor the theft of the China Relief Fund cash, of which Kang had been custodian. Chun Tay always shivered a little whenever he thought of the Dragon Society, but then he would consider the Tower of Heaven, and smile and shrug, thinking of the 3,000 miles of crooked, zigzag flight he had put between himself and the scene of the crime. Sigh! How could they track him down, when they did not even have his true name written in their book of vengeance? Wing Li, he had called himself at the time of the murder. No, by Tao, he had nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing. Thus Chun Tay assured himself, lying awake on his very comfortable bed in his very pleasant room atop the Tower of Heaven, with the morning sun a great golden gong. Stretching lazily, like a contented cat, Chun Tay grinned at the carved wood figure of Kuan Yin on his dresser. The head of the goddess could be pulled out like a cork, and the hollow inside was crammed with wadded rolls of stolen money. Aye, it was not a great fortune, by rice-face measure, but in China it would be accounted a sum of number one wealth. For there, the rice-face dollar was more precious than fei shui jade. And that was Chun Tay's silken dream, to escape to China with his stolen treasure. Hi, he would buy a wine shop or a Yangtze gambling boat. He would buy a dark-eyed daughter of Han as bride, and live in all the luxury of a red-button mandarin. Aye, it was only a matter of time, and patience. The Great War had closed the far seas to all but fighting ships, but now there was peace again. A little more waiting, and he would be able to purchase passage on a China-bound boat. Then he would show the Kemptons a forged China letter, stating that his honorable father lay on his deathbed. He would humbly beg a leave of absence, promising a swift return, and they would swallow the double lie without the least suspicion. Aye, no doubt the stupid, trustful fools would even go with him to the rice-face officials, so that his travel papers might be made up speedily. So, Chun Tay wore a broad grin as he dressed and restored his room to perfect order. Then he went into the spotless kitchen and had a leisurely breakfast. The Kemptons had been out to a very late party the night before. They would not be up and stirring for hours. After performing his usual household tasks, Chun Tay went to have a quiet look into the Major's room. Jelly Belly lay flat on his back, snoring. Last night the Major had celebrated his retirement from military service. Chun had never seen him without his uniform before, and Jelly Belly had looked paunchier than ever, in white tie and tails. Chun Tay found the dress suit flung carelessly over a chair, and gathered it up for pressing, departing noiselessly. Carrying the crumpled suit over his arm, Chun stopped at his own room to get a cigarette from his bedside table, then went on into the kitchen. When the pressing was finished, Chun put the suit on a hanger and stepped back, admiring his expert handiwork. And Chun Tai, the houseboy, thought of Wing Li, the murderer, and grinned crookedly. Hi, let anyone try to untangle the long and twisting trail that separated the two. Aye, that was a task beyond even the fabulous powers of the mighty Dragon Society. Yet deep within him, Chun Tai carried a hard core of fear and uncertainty. All his life Chun had heard whispered tales of the secret power of the dragons, ruthless keepers of the ancient law. Aye, the rice-face law could be broken, and the dragons shrugged. But if the sacred law of hand was broken, then the guilty one was punished with death, swift death, whose only warning was a white flower called Ohakra. Ohakra, a word of fear, of terror. The rice-faced pleased did not know the word, and the sons of Han knew little about the flower itself, except that it was white in color, a dead white. Only those who were marked for death ever saw one. Aye, no doubt the Dragon Council had met swiftly after Kang Lu's killing, and voted death for his murderer, the Ohakra death. Chun Tai drew a deep, hissing breath. Sigh. He was a #1 fool to shiver and shake at a mere mention of a name. Not once in daylight hours had he ever set foot outside the Tower of Heaven, fearing a chance encounter in the streets with some sharp-eyed son of Han who might have known him as Wing Li. He used the rice-face telephone for all necessary purchases, and on the rare occasions when he went for a walk, he left the tower only under cover of darkness, and by a rear door into a side street. Aye, call it an excess of caution, but it was well said that a small stone can break a large vase. No, by Tao, he had left nothing to chance. He was safe here, in his Tower of Heaven, as safe and secure as on an island of the moon. Wah! They cannot have pigeon pie without first catching their pigeon, Chang-tae reminded himself as he turned to his room. He would stretch out on his bed, feast his eyes on the treasure-laden Kuan Yin, and give himself up to dreams of the beckoning future. But on the threshold, Chang-tae stopped dead in his tracks, staring frozen-eyed and speechless at his bed. For there, on the smooth cover, lay a flower, a short-stemmed, dead-white flower. Ohakra! The dread word screamed in Chang-tae's ears, but no sound came from his lips as he glanced wildly around, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Chang-tae's thoughts whirled in panic, logic making a desperate attempt to wrestle with mounting fear. This thing was impossible. Impossible. It could not be the Ohakra. No! True, it was a strange white flower, never seen before, but he must be mistaken. It could not be the dreaded Ohakra. Aye, but what was it then? How had it come there to his room, to his very bed? How? How? It had not been there a little while ago, when he had gone through with Jelly Belly's suit on his arm. Aye, but there it lay, an undeniable fact. Chang-tae stood trembling, not knowing where to turn, what to think, and into his memory came flooding all those whispered tales of the merciless power of the Dragon Society. Terror was like a cold steel blade into his belly, like a tightening noose about his throat. And at that moment, the front door buzzer sounded, sharp and imperious. Chang-tae stood rooted, paralyzed by haunted fears, his scalp crawling with icy prickles. Who could it be? Was it a summons for Chang-tae, the houseboy, or for Wing Li, the murderer? The buzzer rasped again. Aye, he must answer it, or old Horse-eye would appear, angry at being roused from sleep. Forcing himself into a mask of calmness, Chang-tae opened the outer door. But then the mask cracked and crumbled, leaving nothing but naked fear, for it was a Chinaman who stood confronting him, a tall, lean son of Han, clad in somber black. You are called Chang-tae, the slant-eyed stranger demanded briskly. My name is Fang Yi, and I come here to... But Chang-tae cut off the words of doom by hurling the door shut and clawing down the spring lock. Turning, he streaked down the hall to his own room. Stripping off his white jacket, he fumbled into his street coat, flung the treasure-laden Kuan Yin into a battered straw suitcase, and raced on toward the penthouse terrace. Chang-tae realized he had but one chance of saving himself from the dragon vengeance. Flight. Instant flight. If he could get across to the terrace of the twin penthouse, B, untenanted at the moment, he could escape by the elevator on the other side of the building. Chang-tae stared at the 50 feet of vertical emptiness that separated the two terraces. The only way across was a brownstone ledge about a foot wide that ran along the sheer wall. Crawling over the stone railing, Chang-tae started gingerly along the ledge, his face to the wall, his outspread arms pressed tightly against the smooth stones, the suitcase dangling from his right hand. But before he was halfway across, the awkwardly held suitcase began to feel as though it were loaded with paving stones. Chang-tae's wrists and fingers ached from holding it level, but he could not lower his burdened arm without risking his balance. Chun-Tay cursed through gritted teeth as a wrenching cramp seized the muscles of his arm. He felt the precious case slipping from his grasp, falling, and made a frantic lunge to recover it. Then he was falling too, clutching at empty air, and his sharp cry became a long, shrill. It was Police Sergeant Simmons who noticed the fateful white flower still lying on Chun-Tay's bed. The sergeant, notebook in hand, was making up a preliminary report on Chun-Tay's strange death. "What's this?" Simmons asked. "Looks like a gardenia." Mrs. Kempton and the Major glanced at the white flower. "It is a gardenia," the Major replied. "A bit wilted. Must be the one I wore last night. Mrs. Kempton and I were at a party." "Yes, that must be it," Mrs. Kempton confirmed. "It must have dropped out of your lapel while Chun was getting the suit ready for pressing this morning." "Well, no clue in that," Simmons said, tossing the flower aside. The sergeant studied his notebook. "Funny kind of case. Mrs. Kempton, here's this other chink, Fong Yi, standing outside in the hall. He claims he never saw Chun-Tay before, and knows nothing about all this, except that Chun slammed the door in his face. Well, Fong's story sounds pretty fishy, but then you come along and vouch for him." "But I'm sure he's telling the truth," Mrs. Kempton declared. "Fong Yi has been with the Carters for years and years, and he called here today at my special invitation. You see, we had dinner at the Carters recently, and Mrs. Carter was praising Fong as a model houseboy, and I was praising Chun-Tay, and I thought how nice it would be if they got to know each other and become friends. So I invited Fong to call here on his next day off and meet Chun-Tay." "But your Chun-Tay didn't know about that?" Simmons asked. "I forgot to mention it," Mrs. Kempton admitted. "But I really don't see how a simple little thing like that could lead to such a terrible tragedy. Poor Chun! I was only trying to be kind. I thought he must feel very lonely, working among white people all the time, never meeting anyone of his own race." The sergeant's smile had a touch of grimness. Maybe Chun-Tay had very good reasons for not wanting to meet anybody of his own race. All that money hidden inside the statue in his suitcase, maybe he came by it honestly, and maybe not. But we'll soon find out. We'll check on it with every Chinatown in the country, and I think we'll find the answer to all this in 2 words. Guilty conscience. That's one of those things that you'll always find works out the same in all languages. Thanks for watching. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. You can also find my YouTube channel at youtube.com/pulpcast. Please follow, like, and subscribe if you enjoy the show. You can also email me feedback at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.